Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Monday night Life Stories Worldwide event. And I would just like to apologise, first of all, that Alan Jones is still not over his recent illness. So I'm standing in, or sitting in, as it were, for him tonight. But Alan would send his love to everyone who watches on a regular basis and looking at this going forward. So we're here just to welcome you to tonight's Zoom meeting and StreamYard meeting. And we just say that every Monday night we present stories of different lives that have been affected by Christ. All different backgrounds. We've had businessmen, we've had people who've been on drugs, it's been set free, people who've had painful difficulties in their lives, and people who suffered rejection, and so on and so forth. The whole gamut, the whole spectrum of different human experiences we've had here tonight on Zoom meetings. They're on every Monday night, usually live, predominantly live, at 8 o'clock UK time. That's 8 o'clock UK time. And they can be seen on StreamYard, which is a new function we have. They can be seen on Zoom. You can see them on Facebook, and you can also see them on YouTube. We've also started something else quite new, which is podcasts on radio. You can see through Spotify, which I would encourage you to listen to. You can listen to just as you're going about your normal daily chores or whatever, and you can listen to that. So that's another way you can listen to these life stories. We just point to the website we have. It will come up at some point during the meeting. There it is there, lifestoriesworldwide.com. On that, you'll see contact details. There is also a Bible app which you can download for free, which you can use for your own private studies and devotions and growth. There are also links to the Facebook and also the YouTube videos, which have been on there, librarized in there and categorized in there into different, either the Monday nights, or it could be life stories at lunch, which are a wee bit shorter, but it allows you to spend, say, 10 or 20 minutes just catching up a particular life story. So I would encourage you to go to the website and just have a look at the information there, and also gives you details of the speakers coming up. The other thing is just the contact details on there. There's an email address. If you want to contact us, please email us on that one there. It's coming up. It's lifestoriesworldwide@gmail.com. That's lifestoriesworldwide@gmail.com. If you have any questions, want any more information, just email us. We'd only be too happy to contact you and just help you on your walk. So please contact us through email. The other option you have is a telephone number, which again will come up in just a few seconds. It's +44 794 355 0287. +44 794 355 027. Please call us on that number. You can WhatsApp us as well if you prefer to do it that way. So there's some text correspondence. You can phone us or text us, and we would again only be too happy to answer any questions, give you any help or any support you need. So from there, I'm just going to hand you over to our speaker tonight, a fine gentleman called Dr. Ian Robertson. He has been involved in setting up various radio stations and Christian radio stations, and various other things. Tonight he's going to share his story. Now, it's not going to be the normal sharing, just somebody on a screen talking. It will be an interview style, and our own George Collins will do the interview, and Dr. Ian Robertson would then answer those questions. So from me, over to Ian and George, and take it from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Howard. And let me give you a warm welcome, Ian, to Life Stories Worldwide Live. Now, the press that we released on the short bio that we put out says you're a journalist, okay? Now, we've all seen the movies where, you have these journalists seeking a story and all this kind of thing. Is that the kind of journalist you are? Or tell us what journalists actually do, please.
Well, the first job I had as a journalist was actually with my local newspaper in my hometown of Sheffield. And I was trained there for about 18 months before I took on the job as a journalist on the business newspaper, which I did for a couple of years, and then got involved with the evening paper. So I was a print journalist initially, but then when eventually Sheffield acquired a commercial radio station, a number of us that were working on the newspaper moved across to working on news actually on the radio. So I started to work with Radio Hallam, as it was called, and worked there for a number of years in the newsroom and also helping with other programs. Prior to that, I'd had experience with the BBC, and that really sort of helped me in that transition between print radio and working print newspapers and working on radio.
Excellent. Now, of course, so you see, you come from Sheffield, I see, and but in Sheffield, of course, we all know about the Sheffield Steel and the coal mines. When you were growing up in that, did you ever imagine you would be a journalist or on radio?
Not really, because in my early days, I wasn't really very good at school. The only thing I was really interested in was music. And that came about because somebody joined my class at school who was a drummer. And he was quite spectacular, really, as a 15-year-old drummer. Mm-hmm. He knew I played guitar and asked me whether I would go around and play some sessions with him. And eventually, we got a number of other people together until we formed a band. We were all just about 15 and 16 years old. And so at that point, if I was looking towards the future, I really wanted to be a full-time musician, working in a band. I'm sure that may be an ambition for quite a lot of 15, 16-year-olds. Yes. But we got very lucky because a number of promoters had asked us to play at some of the festivals in the local area. And so we did a number of those and became really very popular. And a number of the local bands would play in those, and they'd usually be a celebrity who would come and host it. But the person who organized those was a man called Peter Stringfellow.
Wow.
And that's a name that a number of you may know, probably not for such great reasons, but maybe you don't know the backstory on Peter Stringfellow. Peter and his brother Jeff owned a number of music venues in Sheffield. And in fact, he was reputed, well, it certainly was true, to have managed to book the Beatles for £50 to play in one of his venues when they were next to, I think, second in the charts with Love Me Do. So Peter was a great music promoter long before he ever got involved in those seedy sort of clubs in London. And they were incredible. And they wanted to make Sheffield what Liverpool had become. And so he encouraged a lot of the local bands. And so a number of us played in those bands. And before long, some of us were playing with one or two who were actually making recordings as well. So they were doing demo discs to try and get recording contracts. And I played for a little while in the band of a guy called Vance Arnold and the Avengers. Vance Arnold and the Avengers was the name of the band. And he was a very smart, brilliant singer, very jazz style and everything else. But later in life, he changed his image, he changed his music, and he became known as Joe Cocker.
Wow.
So I had the privilege of playing in his band for a long time. So music was a huge part of my life. I never thought that I would end up being a journalist. I wasn't great at school at English or anything like that. But my story as I went through university changed that, as also because I became a Christian.
Wow. I was going to ask you, did you play support any famous bands? But you've just mentioned Joe Cocker there. So did you play with any other bands as well?
Not really. That was the main one. A number of us played in the local area, and we managed to make reasonable success in terms of doing live gigs, but never got to the level that Joe did in terms of international music.
I mean, the band scene, of course, at that time was renowned for women, drugs, drink. How is it that did you fall into that lifestyle, or was it something that you didn't want to do?
No, not really. I mean, it was always nice to have girls around. I think that would be probably natural. But the drugs and the drink, I think, was very much more the people that were in their 20s.
Right.
And the people, especially in the London area, Sheffield's scene at that time was really very geared. People just wanted to be musicians. They wanted to play. They wanted audiences. They wanted the adulation of that, and that was really where it was at that point. As we know, once it got into the significant part of the 1960s, that did change, and drugs and alcoholism all came through that. And sadly, that happened to Joe Cocker as well.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Sheffield, because it was a very industrial place, of course, and you said you weren't very good at school. Tell us a bit what was like at school. Was school tough for you?
School was tough because I was bone idle. I really didn't give myself the best chances at all, which is not really surprising given the fact that, as I said, I was only interested in music. But my parents were very encouraging about school, about me working with other people in music and so on. So growing up was very supportive. I had two wonderful parents. You mentioned, of course, it was a steel town. My father was a senior manager at a steel firm called Firth Browns. He was incredibly good at maths, which helped me a lot because I was terrible. So I had a very happy childhood. I was an only child, but my parents were very welcoming to my friends, who launched into our house virtually every single evening. So how my mother ever managed to cook for everybody, I'll never know. I think she probably thought it might have been better to have two children rather than one child and 10 friends.
Excellent. So you seem to have very comfortable and nice parents and good friends. And although school was a little bit tough with your education, but as you're going through school, what kind of career did you have in mind at that time?
Well, once I got into the sixth form, I decided that I do subjects that might help me get to university. And I was hoping that I might actually end up as a lawyer. So the subjects I did were going to help, but I didn't want to read law at university. My interest by that time was history. And so I wanted to read history at Oxford University. But in the 1960s, the interesting thing happened was the fact that although I passed the exams to get in, my face didn't really fit. And so I didn't get in. And I ended up at King's College in London, University in London, and read history there. I was surrounded by three groups of people who were my peers. Some of them were training to be doctors. Some of them were training to be lawyers. and others were training in the media. And so I was a bit torn at that point between law and the media when I eventually finished my undergraduate years. But I was given an opportunity because my cousin worked at Sheffield newspapers, and her boss asked whether she knew anybody who would like to work there in their summer holidays. So I managed to get the most wonderful summer holiday job anybody could have, really, working in a newspaper context, learning the skills and getting paid for it as an 18-year-old, and subsequently all the summer vacations after that. And that really gave me the bug to become a journalist.
So as you were doing your summer job, did you learn all the typesetting and all that kind of stuff as well for the printing?
We virtually did every single department, but I felt most comfortable, I think, in writing, and especially in doing interviews. My editor sent me out a lot to do interviews. He gave me some training, but then said, various things you need to do, like you need to research the person you're going to interview well, so that you can ask the right sort of questions. And you mustn't be frightened to ask difficult questions and not just be, friendly all the time. So he gave me a number of interviews. Probably the one that sticks in my mind the most was interviewing George Best, the footballer, while I was at Sheffield newspapers. And that was a really incredible occasion. And George was very communicative. He was certainly on form. And at that point, at his high point in his football career.
Yes, the Irish people have known to speak a word or two. Yes, they have. You said your manager sent you. What was the weirdest interview you were ever sent on?
The weirdest interview probably was with a musical band called Frankenstein and the Monsters. And they were a band that dressed up like Frankenstein, and the band were like monsters. And that was their unique selling point on the stage. And I've never seen anybody as weird as this group were. And I had to try and interview them and get some sense out of them. They weren't as communicative as George Best, probably because, music was their thing, and they weren't really bothered very much about talking to a person from the newspapers. But they did like the interview, and they did thank me for trying hard to get sense out of them.
Did you pass any comment on their musical skills in your report?
I did. I said that they were a very popular Sheffield band. I didn't say I thought they weren't very good.
So as a journalist, I mean, do you always have to be honest and open, or do you have to temper your words that you are reporting as a journalist?
I think you've got to think of your audience. I think it's true if you're a broadcaster, certainly true if you're a journalist. You've got to think about the audience. And there is no doubt that true life stories are the things that impress people most as they read. So it's great if you can get true life stories. And really, you're just giving the interviewee the opportunity to share their story and tell it the way it is from their point of view. What I'm doing really is just prompting them. If it's an interview with a politician, then I think you tend to be more gritty and you tend to be more pushy to try and get out of them what was really the truth behind certain situations. And as anybody knows who's interviewed politicians, it is very hard to get a straight answer sometimes.
Very true. So as a journalist, then, you seem to have covered every spectrum of the interview, from politicians to sports people to the bands. What was your favorite?
Yeah.
Which of those genres was your favorite was?
I'm not sure that anyone was a particular favourite. I mean, there are a number of the one person I probably have interviewed more than anybody else is Sir Cliff Richard, and that's because it goes back to a time when I was training to be a journalist. I worked in a cabaret club where most of the main artists of the UK used to come and sing. And Cliff Richard, as he was then, was a regular performer there. And I did some of the sound and lighting for his set. So I got to know him and the fact that he was a Christian. And so probably through my media career and through his show business career, I probably interviewed him more than anybody else at all. But the most favorite interview I've ever done was with an American president called Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter came to Birmingham and he did a short press conference there, but I got a chance to do a face-to-face, and it's not often you get a chance to do a face-to-face with an American president.
Excellent. So you've been around. Well, say you haven't been around the world. The world came to you, in fact. Now you went to university. Yes. You said you went to university. You studied history, but there was a significant change that happened for you at university. Tell us what happened and how things changed.
Well, I'd been at school, and I was very impressed by an RE teacher who shared her faith as well as sharing her teaching about the Bible. And I did make a commitment to Christ at that time when I was in the sixth form at school. But I went to university, and as most find, there are loads of things that pull you different directions. But I lived in a town called Richmond-on-Thames. And I was invited by one of my resident mates to go along to a church there called Duke Street Baptist Church. And he said that there were a number of people who were going there, and that there was a Sunday evening service with a speaker, and would I like to go? So I went along to that, and it was a speaker called Roger Forster. He was a very interesting guy. I describe him as sort of evangelical James Cagney. He had that sort of presentation, and he obviously became very significant in the Christian community in London. And he was very challenging, and he said, what are you going to, because there were a lot of students there, what are you going to do with your career if you get the career that you want? Are you just there to make money, or are you there to make a difference? And are you there as a Christian to make a difference? And if you're not sure, then I want you to pray this prayer of commitment or recommitment to Christ. And so I did that, and other people I think did as well. And from that point onwards, I realized that whatever God would lead me into, I was willing to be committed to that and to do my best to make a real difference in people's lives and try and win people for Christ through what I did.
And that decision that you made to become a Christian there and then, what difference did that make to your attitude towards the way you reported or the way you were a journalist?
I think it made me more diligent. It made me, I think, more open-minded with people, made me more accepting of people, and trying to help people understand what the Christian faith is all about, and that it's not just following a set of rules. It's a personal faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, who can make a real difference in their lives, as he began to do in my life. I realized, because for all the years that I spent at Duke Street Baptist Church as an undergraduate, we were taught really well by the then minister at the time to realize that the Christian life is a journey. And he once did a series in Sunday evenings on Pilgrim's Progress. And I hadn't read the book for many years, but just realized just that the journey of the Christian is very up and down. It is very challenging, but God is with us through it. And because I felt that in my own life, I felt that was something that I could share with other people as well, both in my job and outside of that.
Okay, you become a Christian, you're in journalism, you're in the big wide world, in entertainment and reporting on things. How difficult was it for you to be a Christian in that type of world?
I actually don't think it was hard at all. Number one, I like a challenge. We sometimes had people who just said, oh, Christianity is rubbish. And I used to love the challenge of saying, well, how do you know that? Have you really looked into it? Have you examined what Jesus claims? So I really always liked to challenge. I was never aggressive with people who disagreed with me. And even if people weren't always nice in the context of the media, and sometimes there are tough personalities that you bump into, I always found the best way was as a peacemaker. And I felt that that was a role that I got as a Christian. And so I didn't worry about the challenges. I didn't worry about the aggression that other people could have. So whereas I never thought I was a very brave person at school, I did feel, that the bravery came from God for me to be able to work in that environment.
And was there ever a situation as a Christian you said to your boss or whoever, look, I can't do that, or what way would you look at the situation like that?
There were many times when that occurred, really. What I always said to him was, don't ask me to lie, because I won't lie for you, and I won't write lies either. So if you ever ask me to do that, I'm just telling you as a Christian, I am not willing to do it. So I think he respected me for that, and it never really came up.
Excellent. So you started as a journalist, young man, with pen and paper and typewriter ribbons. It's moved on a bit now, of course. So you
yes.
So you moved into radio. Tell us how you moved into radio from there.
Well, it was the opportunity. I think I'd done probably a couple of training things with the BBC that showed you how to write copy for the radio, how to do radio interviews, and how to present programs. So I'd learned a number of those skills. And then when I got to work in commercial radio, I was able to do a similar sort of thing. The difference is, of course, in commercial radio, you raise the money by advertising. The BBC is paid for by the license fee. But moving into commercial radio and local commercial radio, Radio Hallam was one of the first local radio stations, commercial radio stations in this country. And it was very community minded. And that matched what I'd experienced in print radio, in newspapers, in print. So from that point of view, it was a really easy transition. And working on the radio, I think, was great. My boss was a Canadian Christian called Bill McDonald. And he was a very significant broadcaster and a radio controller, but also a Christian as well. And he gave us a fabulous opportunity that I never thought we'd get. Dr. Billy Graham, when he did Mission England, never came to Sheffield. And a number of people petitioned the Billy Graham organisation and said, well, would Dr. Graham come to Sheffield? I think they were pessimistic that he might pick that up, but somehow he did. So he came to Sheffield for a whole week.
Wow.
And my boss said it would be great if we could set up our outside broadcasting unit there so that we could broadcast the highlights of the mission. So during that week, we interviewed everybody on the Billy Graham team, including Dr. Graham himself. And every night after the mission, we would put out on Radio Hallam a 1-hour highlights program. And what it did for me, it taught me just how effective radio could be and how the Christian message on radio could be effective. Dr. Graham spoke to 40,000 people in that stadium. The radio every night reached 250,000 people,
Wow.
which taught me that radio can reach the parts that others cannot reach, as they say.
To quote a certain advert, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean that was in the 80s, of course, when Billy Graham came across. 84, I think it was, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
broadcasting
85 in Sheffield.
It's slightly different broadcasting now, of course. So a Christian, they've got their own TV stations and things like that. So, and of course, there's a lot less on mainstream. How do you find that today?
I think that's very sad. I think it's an indication of how much the Christian faith has been diminished by people who control the media. And I don't think Lord Reith, for example, would be very enamored by the fact that Christian broadcasting, or the broadcasting of the Christian faith, has been minimized on the BBC. Obviously, he didn't know about commercial radio and things like that, but I think he would probably turn in his grave if he felt that what he had a vision for wasn't being carried through forever, as it were. So we have to accept that the opportunities on mainstream radio and television are much less now than they ever were.
Indeed. I can remember, I mean, going back late 70s, early 80s, when even Tyne Tees used to broadcast. At the end of the day, they used to have a prayer and everything at the end of the day, but nothing like that anymore.
Yes.
Now, of course, speaking of preaching the gospel, you moved on to Trans World Radio. Tell us a little bit about
the reason for that. Yes, the reason for that was that I'd been involved in a conference in Sheffield, a media conference in Sheffield, and one of the people there was the European director for Trans World Radio, and asked whether I would be willing to come along to work for Trans World Radio and set up their satellite broadcasting system. Now, not the technicality of it, but rather the programming of it, so that we would get programming on their satellite output that was different from their shortwave output, which obviously was getting less and less popular. Shortwave was eventually going out, but satellite broadcasting was coming in. And so helping them be able to do that was a real privilege. And of course, it became a platform for many other Christian radio operators as well, to be able to get on satellite when they couldn't get licenses to be on terrestrial radio.
Wow. So, yeah, that was pretty good. Also, you moved on to Premier Radio. That was another door open for you, of course.
It was. And while I was working at Trans World Radio, Premier Radio just started 1995. And I knew Peter Meadows, who set up Premier Radio. And I was there at the launch of it, never thinking that I would be involved. But the CEO of Trans World Radio went to see the chairman of Premier Radio just after Premier Radio got into a bit of a difficulty. And Trans World Radio CEO said to the chairman of Premier Radio, "What could we do to help you?" And the answer came back, "Give us Ian Robertson." and basically, Trans World Radio sponsored me for a year to work for Premier Radio, to try and get Premier Radio back on its feet, more involved with the Christian community, more listeners, more salespeople, and so on. So I was able to become part of that. And I was only supposed to be there for a year, and it ended up 20 years. So
Wow.
things weren't quite the way the plan would go. And that's because so many things happened during those 20 years for us getting Premier to become the significant Christian broadcaster that it is.
And during those years, have you seen any miracle of the hand of God work in certain ways in radio or in people's lives?
Yeah, yes, we had all sorts of things happening to us. Quite early on, we were broadcasting an event from Wembley Stadium called the Champion of the World. It was an event organised by Gerald Coates, the late Gerald Coates, and Noel Richards, and we were going to be broadcasting that live. A million and one things went wrong with that, and it was just amazing just to see how God put the right people at the right time in the right place, and it all worked. And very soon after that, there was a March for Jesus, which we were also broadcasting live, and we couldn't get any what they call ISDN connections, and they wouldn't offer us any. They said they couldn't put them up. And then we got a phone call the day before it happened to say, we managed to put a transmission post near where you want to be, and you'll be able to do your broadcasts completely out of our hands, out of the blue. People were praying like mad that we would be able to do it. Not something that we created, but something God put the right people in the right place at the right time.
So from the sound of it then, prayer actually works. Tell us how it worked in your life.
Prayer works, and we made it work in a practical way, in all sorts of ways during those years. And we had stories of people that were healed through the broadcast, of people that were converted through the broadcast, some people from other religions who came to faith as well. And of course, the radio is not a community thing, it's one-to-one. And
Amen.
just as people listen, their lives can be impacted. And so it is a great way of evangelism, as well as being an education of the Christian faith as well.
Now, during all that time, of course, tell us a little bit about your personal life. I mean, did you meet a wife, get married, and have children? And just tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I got married and I had two wonderful children. And as I am speaking you to today, I'm at my daughter's house dog sitting. So if you can hear dogs in the background, I tried to quiet them. And that's because she got married and she just had her first child, and they've gone away on their first holiday, which was only possible because Granddad could come and dog sit and look after the two dogs for a week.
And how old is baby?
A pleasure to do it.
How old is the
baby? Is 7 months old, and he's called Luca. Is a delightful child.
Is that your first grandchild?
It's my first grandchild. I'm thinking it won't be my last, but I'm having to I'm sure, as these people who are watching will know, I'm having to relearn old skills. I've forgotten what it was like to be changing nappies and feeding babies and getting them off to sleep and things like that. So it's a refreshing change to do it all again.
And has this, I mean, for me, our first grandchild came along 2 years ago, and it has kind of revitalized our life. Has that done the same for you, revitalized your life? The new birth?
It has, yeah. It's meant that I've spent more time maybe with the children and now with the grandchild than I've done for quite a long time. But I've been in the position where when I stepped down from Premier, I decided that as I'd never managed to do it, I would write my PhD. So I took 3 years out to do that and write a book off the back of it. And so that time was then a lot more flexible to be with the children. And when the grandchild came along, of course, they were very happy for the help.
They're absolutely brilliant grandchildren. I really like them myself. Now, you walked the corridors of power, shall we say, and rubbed shoulders with many, many famous people in your job. How did you manage to stay normal and level-headed in that particular situation?
And that's probably because I viewed the people as people that were endowed with gifts, some of which they'd worked hard towards. And so although they might have become superstars or very significant politicians, whatever, they are still human beings, but have a particular skill or gift, which I would admire. And that made me enthusiastic to talk to them, because every one of them have got a good story. It's either the story about themselves or it's a story about what they do. And I'm genuinely interested in people. So I was never starstruck with any of them. But obviously I had to be respectful in the way that I would talk to them. If you're talking to the President of the United States, you don't call him mate or something like that. And their press officer did remind me that although that I was to call him Mr. President in the interview. So you have to, be the formal person that is required and respectful because you've got a unique opportunity. So I was never starstruck, but I did have great admiration for most of the people that I interviewed.
Well, that's absolutely fine. You can call me Mr. Collins if you like.
Thank you, sir.
I was going to ask you, you mentioned the book, of course. It was published last year. Tell us a little bit about the book and what it's all about.
Yeah. The book was a comparison of UK and American Christian broadcast or religious broadcasting between 1922 and 1995. Now, those years are significant because 1922 was when the first Christian broadcast took place in America. Right. They were ahead of us. And 1995 was when Premier Radio took to the airwaves in this country. And that was the, if you like, the latest of the most significant terrestrial broadcast, Christian broadcast. So those two dates were the parameters of the study. And it was about the belief that the personalities that were behind much Christian broadcasting were charismatic, entrepreneurial people like Dr. Billy Graham or Pat Robertson or people like that, who had people around them, but they were the charismatic, gifted speakers that were able to communicate in radio and television. So my belief in the book is that Christian broadcasting, religious broadcasting, made a significant impact with the power of God using those people. This wasn't humanism. This wasn't just a mechanical thing. These people were there because God had given them those gifts and surrounded them with people that helped them have the opportunity to speak to millions of people, far more people than they could ever speak to in the church. I launched the book in St. Martin's in the Fields. And the reason for that was that St. Martin's in the Fields was one of the first venues for Christian broadcasting in this country on the BBC. It had a minister called Dick Shepherd, and he became a firm favourite on the BBC. He was an incredible speaker. And because of his broadcasts on the BBC, his church, St. Martin's in the Fields, was so packed full that people would queue around the church to get in.
Wow.
It was that significant. And in the basement, well, I call it the basement, the lower ground floor of St. Martin's in the Field, if you ever get a chance to go, is the Dick Shepherd Chapel. That is a memorial to this man that was such a giant of broadcasting on the BBC. Wow. So I managed to launch the book there with lots of people who contributed to the book and interested people who wanted to come along and hear.
And where's the book available?
The book is available in all Christian bookshops. It's available on Amazon, or it's available just virtually anywhere, like Waterstones will order it and so on.
Excellent.
And yeah, so having got one book done, I was then approached to write another one, but I haven't got very well on with that.
Now, of course, you started the journalism with pen and paper, jotter and pen, going out to interviews. But of course, over the years, journalism has significantly changed as to what we have today to social media. How do you view social media today compared to what it was years ago?
Well, social media is like all things. It can be good and bad. It's a platform that's worth using, but it's a platform that, as we've seen because of various reports, can be so easily abused. People have been denigrated on it, abused on it. And so what was created to be a helpful platform, keep people informed with each other, socially interacting with each other, can also have a downside to it and a sinister side to it as well. When I worked with the BBC, I had a number of stories of people who, because of social media, got themselves into real difficulties. And there is one that was in the press many years ago, a delightful lady called Jill Dando. And you may well remember that Jill was sadly murdered on her doorstep, literally. Yes. It shocked everybody in the BBC. But as the police dug behind that, they believed that the perpetrator of that murder had managed to trace Jill through social media things, clues that he'd put together, until eventually he got to the place of finding out where she lived. So I think people have to be careful what they say on social media, so that their personal details aren't compromised, whether that's financial or family, in a way that could lead to a devastating thing like Jill experienced as well. But there are positive ways of using it. Most Christian organizations are on Facebook. Most churches are on Facebook. Most people have got websites. All of that can be a very modern communication, but it is literally a tool. It's not. It will never better the actual personal contact of people in one way or another.
I was just going to mention that because, of course, the pandemic would have had a big impact on contact, and a lot of people went online with meetings and social media. Yeah. This is how life story started.
Yes, and I think that was a good thing. Many churches went online and they were able to then function with their services. The downside of that, I hear lots, is the fact that some churches have said the people that went online to join in the services, quite a lot of people never came back. They're still watching the services online. And so they've lost a number of people from the presence of the church, even if they're still linked online.
Now, you yourself, of course, are involved with leading the way. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
National director. What is involved in your day-to-day job on that, shall we say? I mean, the social media involved in that as well?
We have people that deal with our social media, yes. A lot of it is trying to promote Michael Youssef on platforms on radio and on television, so that people benefit from his preaching. He is a fabulous preacher and teacher, and now very much an evangelist. He's been doing evangelistic meetings in Macon in America, and also coming up in Belfast and in Dublin in the autumn. So it's a great ministry. It's been going 20 years in the UK alone, and last year there was the celebration of that at Westminster Central Hall with a great festival atmosphere there.
And what's Dr. Youssef like to work for?
He's a lovely man. He is very humble. He's very sincere, very prayerful man. And of course, he is 74.
Wow, he doesn't look it, that's for sure.
And 74, you know, he's committed to literally working himself to the end. I remember once having dinner with two of the Billy Graham team, Cliff Barrows and Beverly Shea. And I remember in that conversation over dinner saying to Beverly Shea, how long do you think you can continue to do these sorts of missions? And he put his hand on mine and said, it is better to burn out than rust out. And I think that's what Dr. Youssef feels, that he wants to be preaching and teaching till his dying day.
Excellent. I was going to ask you, do you still play the guitar today?
I still do play the guitar. I learned to play the drums as well, but I still do play the guitar. So I entertain my children on occasions. I don't play in a band anymore.
You'll soon be playing the wheels on the bus now for your grandson.
Oh, yes, we could do that one, yes.
And I did notice, of course, you mentioned your second book. Incidentally, I'm just reading about the man, Martin Luther. I just started his biography, actually. What was it about Martin Luther that you wanted to write?
I learned a lot about Martin Luther when I was at university, and it wasn't that much, but I was always intrigued by this man who really just took on the Roman Catholic Church, and he was just an ordinary monk in Germany. But as I read more about him, I thought, one day it would be really nice to do more on that. And like you mentioned reading about him. I read this book about him, which I saw in Foyle's bookshop in London. And the person who had written it was the professor of history at Oxford University. And I discovered her email and wrote to her and said, I studied about Martin Luther as part of my history course at King's College London, and said, I'd love to have written a book, but you've already done it. And she emailed me back, surprisingly, and said, you won't believe this, but the man that was your lecturer at King's College in London was a writer, an author, and I read all his books when I lived in Australia. And my first job was at King's College in London as a history lecturer. And she said, I'm not the expert on Martin Luther. There is a man called Kaufmann in Germany. I'll give you his email. So I got his email, wrote to him and said, I would have loved to have written something about Martin Luther. I've just read one of your books. And he was very gracious and said, there is so much more you can write about Martin Luther. And the biggest thing you could do that none of us have done is to write about the impact that Martin Luther made on Western civilization because of the Reformation.
It wasn't just the fact that he stood up for religion. Yeah, he changed the whole world, really. Yeah, he changed the whole world.
Yes. So watch this space. The book will come out eventually.
Excellent. I'll be watching over because I'd like to read it myself. Now, through your life, you've had many decisions to make. You've made a lot of good choices by the sound of it. But what was the best decision you ever made in your life?
the best decision I ever made in my life was to become a Christian. If I hadn't have become a Christian, I'm not really sure where my life would have gone to. So becoming a Christian was definitely the best decision of my life. It changed my life. Eventually, when, of course, I had other friends, it changed their lives because many of them became Christians, and my family too. So it was definitely the best decision of my life.
Thank you so much for speaking to us here, Ian, at Life Stories Worldwide. And of course, these again will be rebroadcast on social media, and we're bringing the gospel. In fact, we've reached millions, would you believe, with the gospel so far. So thank you once again for your great story. And of course, that book is called With God on Our Side, the first one. Is that correct?
It is.
Yeah, that's available at Amazon. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Howard.
Ian, thank you so much for such an interesting story. I was impacted very deeply by what you said and how you presented it. And forgive me, this isn't supposed to be denigrated, but you're just an ordinary fellow. You're just an ordinary fellow that you followed God and God touched your life. And I think that is so significant to hear that story from you. It's been such an illuminating story, and just so the different paths that God's taken you down, it's just been absolutely fantastic. And thank you for being so honest and straightforward, and also answering the question that George posed to you about the decision that you made. What was the most important decision? Now, for people watching tonight or in future times, that decision is a very important decision because it's an eternal decision. You only get to make that decision once, because after we pass away from this life, we sit before the judgment seat of God. So you've got to make that decision in this life of where you're going to go. So I'm just going to invite people who are watching just now or in the future, if you want to make that decision, I'm going to say a prayer. And if you want to say that, you should say it sincerely from your heart. God will take that prayer at your word, and he will come into your life. There's other way of doing it. You can click onto the prayer link on our website that has come up before on the screen. But it's lifestoriesworldwide.com. If you just go, that's coming on just now. Or email us at that email address, and we'll send you more details. But I'm just going to go through a prayer, a very short prayer, very straightforward prayer. If you want to say that prayer, join with me just now and just say that prayer, and with sincerity in your heart, and God will hear that. If you want to repeat it after me. Dear Lord Jesus, I know that I am a sinner. I have a choice to make about my life. Jesus, I believe that you died for me so I wouldn't have to pay the penalty for my sin, and that you rose from the dead, making a way for me to become a child of God. I turn from my sins and ask you to come into my heart and my life. I want to trust you and follow you as my Saviour and my Lord from this moment on. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for forgiving me and accepting me into your family. I pray this in your holy name. Amen. I pray this in your holy name. Jesus died and paid that price at Calvary at the cross when he shed his own blood, that he washed our sins, my sins, your sins, out the world's sins away by that shedding of the blood. And all you need to do is come to the Father and ask him to come into your heart, Jesus to come into your heart, confess that you're a sinner and you need a Saviour, and you place your life, just as Ian did, into his hands, and he will lead you every step of the way. And things won't be easy. Things are not straightforward, but Jesus is there with you. God is there with you, and he'll take your hand and lead you forward and lead you on. So thank you again, Ian. Thank you, George, for that interview, and thank you so much. We'll be able to hear that and see that again in future times, and I look forward to watching it again in the evenings to follow. So thank you so much, and thank you, John, for technical links in the background. Now, I'm just going to invite you again to our meeting next week, which is at the same time, 8 o'clock on StreamYard or Zoom or Facebook or YouTube or whatever other channel you want to join with us at. Next week's speaker is a gentleman called Cyril Gordon. He is from a Jewish background, Jewish family, and he came to know Jesus as his Saviour. So with that, I'd like to thank you again for joining us and watching us live, but also in the days to come. May God richly, richly bless you, richly bless every single one of you, and just put your hands and your heart into him, and he will lead you going forward. Bless you, and thank you so much. Good night, everyone. Goodbye.
Good night.
Good night.